Lieutenant Marcus Thompson stood at attention in the crisp morning. Air of Naval Training Command San Diego, his perfectly pressed uniform caught the early sunlight as he surveyed the training grounds. That had become his domain over the past 3 years. At 28, Marcus had earned his reputation as one of the toughest instructors in the program. His jawline was sharp, his posture rigid, and his voice could crack like a whip when needed. The trainees knew him well. They whispered stories about his legendary temper and his impossible standards. Marcus took pride in breaking down cocky recruits and rebuilding them into disciplined sailors. He had turned hundreds of civilians into military personnel, and he did it through sheer force of will and unwavering authority. This particular Tuesday morning felt different, though Marcus couldn't put his finger on why. The base buzzed with unusual activity. Officers hurried past with clipboards and serious expressions. Something was happening, but nobody had bothered to inform him about any changes to his schedule. Marcus checked his watch as he walked toward the administration building. He had a meeting with Commander Richards about the new training protocols, but first, he needed to review the files of the incoming instructor who would be joining his team. The Navy had decided to add another trainer to handle the increased number of recruits, and Marcus wasn't thrilled about sharing his authority. The personnel office was busy when he arrived. Yeoman Collins looked up from her computer screen with a nervous smile. She had worked with Marcus long enough to recognize the signs of his impatience. "Lieutenant Thompson, sir," she said, pulling a thin manila folder from her desk drawer. "Here's the file for your new team member, Chief Petty Officer Daniel Rivera. He's scheduled to arrive this morning." Marcus took the folder and flipped it open. The photograph showed a man who appeared to be in his early 30s with calm, dark eyes and a slight smile. Nothing remarkable about his appearance, but something in his expression caught Marcus's attention. It was the look of someone who had seen things, experienced situations that most people never would. The service record was brief, almost suspiciously so. Rivera had completed basic training at Great Lakes, served on 2 deployments, and had been stationed at various locations around the world. But there were gaps in the timeline, periods where his assignments were listed simply as classified operations or special duty assignment. "Collins," Marcus called out, not looking up from the file. "What do you know about this Rivera character? This record looks incomplete." Yeoman Collins shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "I'm sorry, sir. That's all the information I was cleared to receive. Commander Richards said he would brief you personally on any additional details." Marcus closed the folder with more force than necessary. He hated mysteries, especially when they involved people who would be working under his command. In his experience, sailors with classified backgrounds were either exceptional performers or complete disasters. There was rarely any middle ground. The sound of boots on linoleum announced someone's approach. Marcus turned to see Commander Richards walking down the hallway with a man in dress blues. Even from a distance, Marcus could tell this was Rivera. The man moved with a fluid confidence that was different from the typical military bearing Marcus was accustomed to seeing. "Lieutenant Thompson," Commander Richards called out as they approached, "I'd like you to meet Chief Petty Officer Rivera. He'll be joining your training team effective immediately." Marcus stepped forward and extended his hand. Rivera's handshake was firm but not aggressive, and his eyes met Marcus's directly without any hint of challenge or submission. It was the handshake of someone who was completely comfortable with himself. "Pleasure to meet you, Lieutenant," Rivera said. His voice was calm and measured, with just a trace of a southern accent. "I'm looking forward to working with your team." "Chief Rivera comes highly recommended," Commander Richards added. "I'm confident he'll be a valuable addition to your program." Marcus nodded politely, but internally, he was already preparing his speech about chain of command and proper procedures. New instructors needed to understand from day one that he ran a tight ship, and there was no room for cowboys or glory seekers. "I'll show you to your quarters and give you a tour of the facilities," Marcus said to Rivera. "We can discuss your role and responsibilities along the way." As they walked across the base, Marcus launched into his standard orientation speech. He explained the training schedule, the performance standards, and the disciplinary procedures. He outlined his expectations for punctuality, appearance, and conduct. Rivera listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or asking brief, relevant questions. "The most important thing you need to understand," Marcus continued as they approached the barracks, "is that these recruits require constant supervision and firm guidance. Many of them come from civilian backgrounds where they've never faced real discipline. It's our job to break down their bad habits and rebuild them according to military standards." "I understand," Rivera replied simply. Something about the man's calm acceptance irritated Marcus. Most new instructors either showed enthusiasm for his methods or asked questions about his approach. Rivera seemed to be processing the information without any emotional response whatsoever. They spent the next hour touring the training facilities. Marcus pointed out the obstacle course, the classroom buildings, and the physical training areas. He explained the daily routine and introduced Rivera to several other instructors. Throughout the tour, Rivera remained attentive but quiet, observing everything with those steady dark eyes. As they finished the tour near the main training field, Marcus decided to test Rivera's reaction to real training conditions. A group of recruits was struggling through rope climbing exercises under the supervision of Petty Officer Johnson. Several of the trainees were clearly having difficulty, and their frustration was evident. "Johnson tends to go easy on them," Marcus said loudly enough for Rivera to hear. "Sometimes you have to raise your voice to get their attention and motivate them to push harder." Without warning, Marcus strode onto the field and began shouting at the struggling recruits. His voice carried across the entire training area as he berated their technique, questioned their commitment, and demanded better performance. The recruits snapped to attention and redoubled their efforts. Clearly intimidated by his presence, Marcus returned to where Rivera was standing, expecting to see some reaction to his display of authority. Instead, Rivera was watching the recruits with an expression of quiet assessment, as if he were studying their responses and measuring their capabilities. "That's how you maintain discipline and standards," Marcus said, breathing slightly harder from his outburst. "These kids need to understand that mediocrity isn't acceptable." Rivera nodded slowly. "Every situation requires the right approach," he said neutrally. The response frustrated Marcus even more. It wasn't agreement or disagreement, just another calm observation that revealed nothing about Rivera's own philosophy or methods. The next morning arrived with the sharp blast of the wake-up call at 0500 hours. Marcus had barely slept, his mind turning over questions about his new team member. Rivera had been assigned a small office next to his own, and Marcus planned to observe the man's first day of actual instruction closely. The recruits assembled on the main training field in neat formations, their nervous energy palpable in the cool morning air. Marcus took his usual position at the front, clipboard in hand, while Rivera stood slightly to the side with his hands clasped behind his back. The new instructor had arrived exactly on time, his uniform immaculate and his bearing professional. "Listen up, people," Marcus barked to the assembled group. "Today we're introducing Chief Petty Officer Rivera to our training team. He'll be working with some of you on specialized exercises. The same standards apply regardless of who's instructing you." Marcus gestured to Rivera, who stepped forward with that same calm demeanor Marcus had noticed the day before. The recruits turned their attention to the new instructor, some looking curious, others appearing relieved to have a break from Marcus's intensity. "Good morning," Rivera said, his voice carrying clearly across the field without any need to shout. "I'm looking forward to working with all of you. We'll start with some basic team-building exercises and see how you work together under pressure." Marcus frowned. Team-building exercises weren't part of the standard curriculum. He made a mental note to speak with Rivera about following established protocols. Rivera divided the recruits into small groups and began leading them through a series of problem-solving challenges. Marcus watched from a distance, expecting to see the usual chaos that occurred when recruits were given too much freedom. Instead, he observed something unexpected. The groups were actually working together effectively. Rivera moved between them quietly, offering brief suggestions and asking pointed questions that seemed to help the recruits think through their approaches. There was no shouting, no intimidation, Yet the trainees appeared focused and engaged. One group was struggling with a particularly difficult challenge that involved moving heavy equipment across an obstacle course without using their hands. Marcus had seen this exercise before, and it typically resulted in frustration and arguments among the participants. Instead of stepping in to correct their approach, Rivera simply asked the group a single question: "What resources do you have that you're not using?" The recruits looked around, suddenly noticing rope, wooden planks, and other materials they had overlooked. Within minutes, they had developed an innovative solution that impressed even Marcus. Another group was attempting to navigate a rope bridge while carrying a simulated wounded teammate. One of the recruits, a young woman named Petty Officer Johnson, was visibly struggling with the physical demands of the exercise. Marcus expected Rivera to either lower the standards or single her out for additional training. Instead, Rivera approached the group and asked, "How can you modify your approach to use everyone's strengths effectively?" The other recruits quickly realized they could rotate positions and share the load more efficiently. Johnson found herself in a role that utilized her smaller size and agility rather than raw strength. The entire group completed the exercise successfully. Marcus felt his irritation growing. These methods went against everything he had learned about military training. Soldiers needed to follow orders without question, not spend time thinking through creative solutions. They needed to push through discomfort and fear, not find ways to make tasks easier. During the lunch break, Marcus cornered Rivera in the instructor's lounge. The room was empty except for the two of them, and Marcus decided it was time to establish some clear boundaries. "Chief, I need to talk to you about your training methods," Marcus began, keeping his voice level but firm. "The exercises you're using aren't in our standard curriculum. These recruits need to learn discipline and follow established procedures." Rivera looked up from his sandwich with those calm eyes. "I understand your concern, Lieutenant. Could you help me understand what specific problems you see with the approach?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He had expected Rivera to either apologize and fall in line or defend his methods defensively. Instead, the man seemed genuinely interested in Marcus's perspective. "The problem," Marcus said, his voice rising slightly, "is that you're treating these recruits like they're in some kind of summer camp. Military training is supposed to be tough. It's supposed to break them down and build them back up according to military standards. And what do you see as the end goal of that process?" Rivera asked quietly. "The end goal?" Marcus felt his face flushing. "The end goal is producing disciplined sailors who can follow orders and perform under pressure. These people are going to be serving on ships and in combat zones. They need to be tough." Rivera nodded slowly. "I agree completely. Toughness and discipline are essential. I'm just curious about the most effective way to develop those qualities." Marcus stared at the man, feeling increasingly frustrated by his calm responses. Every challenge to Rivera's methods was met with questions rather than arguments. It was like trying to argue with a wall that asked thoughtful questions in return. "Look," Marcus said, abandoning any pretense of diplomatic discussion. "I've been training recruits for 3 years. I know what works and what doesn't. These people need structure and firm leadership. They need to learn that there are consequences for failure. Have you noticed any problems with the recruits' performance today?" Rivera asked. Marcus had to admit privately that the recruits had performed better than usual. They seemed more engaged and worked together more effectively. But he attributed that to beginner's luck rather than any superior training methods. "One good day doesn't prove anything," Marcus said. "Wait until these people face real pressure. Wait until they're scared and exhausted and everything's going wrong. That's when you'll see whether your gentle approach actually prepared them for reality." Rivera was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus thought he might have finally gotten through to the man. Instead, Rivera asked another question. "What kind of real pressure are you thinking about? What situations are these recruits most likely to face in their naval careers?" Marcus felt his temper flaring again. "Combat situations. Emergency scenarios. Times when people are depending on them to perform their duties correctly regardless of how they feel about it." "And in those situations," Rivera continued, Do you think they'll perform better if they've learned to think quickly and work together as a team? Or if they've learned to wait for someone to tell them exactly what to do? The question hit Marcus like a cold splash of water. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The answer should have been obvious, but Rivera's calm logic was making him question his own assumptions before Marcus could formulate a response. Petty Officer Williams burst through the lounge door. "Lieutenant Thompson, sir, we need you on the training field immediately. There's been an accident." Marcus and Rivera rushed to the training field where a crowd of recruits had gathered around the obstacle course. As they approached, Marcus could see one of the trainees lying on the ground near the rope climb station. Recruit Anderson, a 19-year-old from Ohio, was conscious but clearly in pain, holding his left ankle. "What happened here?" Marcus demanded as he pushed through the group of concerned recruits. "Sir." "Anderson was attempting the rope climb when he lost his grip about 15 feet up," reported Petty Officer Harris, who had been supervising the exercise. "He tried to catch himself but landed wrong on his ankle." Marcus knelt beside Anderson, whose face was pale with pain and embarrassment. "Can you move your foot, Anderson?" "I think so, sir, but it hurts pretty bad," Anderson replied through gritted teeth. "I'm sorry, Lieutenant. I thought I had a better grip on the rope." "Don't worry about apologies right now," Marcus said, his training taking over. "We need to get you to medical and have this looked at properly." As Marcus began assessing the situation, he noticed Rivera moving quietly among the other recruits. Instead of dispersing them or ordering them back to training, Rivera was speaking with them individually, asking how they were feeling and whether anyone else had experienced similar problems with the rope climb. "Chief Rivera," Marcus called out, irritation creeping into his voice. "Could you help me get Anderson to the medical facility?" "Of course," Rivera replied, but instead of immediately moving toward Anderson, he turned to address the gathered recruits. "Listen carefully. Accidents like this happen in training, and they happen in real-world situations. The important thing is how we respond. Harris, good job reporting exactly what you saw. The rest of you, I want you to think about what you observed and what we can learn from this incident." Marcus felt his jaw clench. This was exactly the wrong time for Rivera's philosophical approach. Anderson needed medical attention, and the other recruits needed to get back to their training schedule. "Chief, we can discuss lessons learned later," Marcus said sharply. "Right now, we need to focus on getting Anderson proper care." Rivera nodded and moved to help lift Anderson. But as they supported the injured recruit between them, Marcus noticed something unexpected. The other trainees weren't standing around looking lost or confused as they usually did when routines were disrupted. Instead, they had organized themselves into small groups and were discussing the incident calmly and constructively. Several recruits had pulled out notebooks and were writing down observations. Others were examining the rope climb station more carefully, pointing out potential hazards they hadn't noticed before. Rather than panic or chaos, Rivera's brief intervention had created a focused learning environment at the medical facility. Navy Corpsman Rodriguez quickly examined Anderson's ankle and determined it was a moderate sprain rather than a fracture. Anderson would need to stay off his feet for several days but would be able to continue with modified training. "Anderson will be fine," Rodriguez told Marcus and Rivera as they prepared to leave. "This kind of injury is pretty common with rope climbing exercises. Usually happens when recruits get overconfident and don't maintain proper technique throughout the climb." As they walked back toward the training field, Marcus found himself thinking about Rodriguez's comment about overconfidence. Anderson was one of the stronger recruits physically, and Marcus had noticed that he sometimes rushed through exercises instead of focusing on proper form. "Lieutenant," Rivera said as they approached the field, "would it be all right if I suggested a modification to the rope climbing protocol?" Marcus stopped walking and turned to face Rivera. "What kind of modification?" "I noticed that several recruits were having grip issues similar to Anderson's. Instead of just pushing them to climb higher, we might consider spending more time on grip strength and technique training before advancing to greater heights." The suggestion made sense, but Marcus felt defensive about his training methods being questioned. "Chief, these recruits need to be challenged. If we lower the standards every time someone gets hurt, we're not preparing them for real-world conditions. I'm not suggesting we lower the standards, Rivera replied calmly. I'm suggesting we build a stronger foundation before advancing to more challenging elements. In my experience, that actually results in better performance over time. Your experience? Marcus asked, his frustration finally boiling over. Where exactly did you gain this experience? Your service record is about as informative as a classified document. Rivera was quiet for a moment, and Marcus thought he had finally rattled the man's calm demeanor. Instead, Rivera looked directly at him with those steady dark eyes. You're right that my recent assignments have been classified, Rivera said quietly. I can't discuss the details, but I can tell you that I've worked with teams in high-stress environments where performance under pressure was literally a matter of life and death. Something in Rivera's tone made Marcus pause. There was no boasting or defensiveness in the statement, just a simple acknowledgement of fact. For the first time since meeting him, Marcus began to wonder if there might be more to Rivera's background than he had assumed. What kind of teams? Marcus asked, his curiosity overcoming his irritation. Small unit operations, Rivera replied. Situations where every team member had to be able to think independently and adapt quickly to changing conditions. The kind of scenarios where following a rigid script wasn't enough. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. Small unit operations with classified assignments could mean only a few things in the Navy, and most of them involved special warfare units. The realization that Rivera might have special operations experience changed Marcus's perspective on their earlier conversations. Are you telling me you're special ops? Marcus asked directly. Rivera didn't answer immediately. He looked across the training field where the recruits were now working through modified exercises, helping each other maintain proper form and technique. What I'm telling you, Rivera said finally, is that I've learned the difference between breaking people down to rebuild them and building people up to make them stronger. Both approaches can produce disciplined personnel, but one creates followers and the other creates leaders. Before Marcus could respond, they were interrupted by shouts from the training field. One of the recruit groups was having a heated argument about the proper way to complete an exercise, and the situation was escalating quickly. Marcus immediately began striding toward the disturbance, ready to restore order with his usual authoritative intervention. But Rivera placed a gentle hand on his arm. Let's see how they handle it, Rivera suggested quietly. Chief. This is exactly what I was talking about, Marcus said, pulling away from Rivera's restraining hand. When discipline breaks down, you have to step in immediately or the whole program falls apart. Marcus marched toward the arguing recruits, his voice already rising to command attention. But as he got closer, he noticed something that made him slow his approach. The argument was actually a discussion about safety procedures and proper technique. The recruits weren't fighting about personal issues or trying to avoid work. They were debating the best way to complete the exercise safely and effectively. Even more surprising, they were beginning to resolve the dispute themselves. The group leader, Recruit Martinez, was asking each person to explain their perspective, and then guiding the group toward a consensus solution. Marcus stopped walking and watched as the recruits worked through their disagreement, and returned to their exercise with renewed focus and better communication. It was exactly the kind of problem-solving and leadership behavior that the Navy wanted to develop in its personnel. Rivera appeared beside him quietly. Sometimes the best intervention is knowing when not to intervene, he said softly. That evening, Marcus sat in his quarters staring at his laptop screen. He had been trying to write his daily training report for over an hour, but his thoughts kept returning to the day's events. Everything he had observed challenged his fundamental beliefs about military training and leadership. The recruits who had worked with Rivera showed measurably better performance in several key areas. Their teamwork was more effective, their problem-solving was more creative, and their overall morale seemed higher. Yet Rivera had achieved these results without raising his voice once or using any of the intimidation techniques that Marcus considered essential. Marcus pulled up Rivera's personnel file again, studying the gaps and classified assignments with new understanding. If his suspicions were correct, Rivera had experience with some of the most elite units in the military. Special operations personnel were trained to think independently, adapt quickly, and perform under extreme pressure. They were exactly the kind of sailors the Navy needed more of. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Marcus opened it to find Rivera standing in the hallway, still in his duty uniform but looking relaxed and approachable. "Sorry to bother you, Lieutenant," Rivera said. "I wondered if you had a few minutes to discuss tomorrow's training schedule." Marcus hesitated, then stepped aside to let Rivera enter. His quarters were sparse and organized, with military precision evident in every detail. Rivera glanced around briefly, his eyes taking in the commendation certificates on the walls and the neat stack of training manuals on the desk. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," Marcus began, surprising himself with his directness. "About building people up versus breaking them down. I need to understand your background better if we're going to work together effectively." Rivera settled into one of the two chairs near Marcus's small table. "What would you like to know?" "Let's start with the obvious question," Marcus said, taking the other chair. "Are you a Navy SEAL?" Rivera was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see him weighing his response carefully. "I can't discuss the specific details of my previous assignments," he said finally. "But I can tell you that I've worked with special warfare units, and I've learned some things about training and leadership that might be different from conventional approaches." The confirmation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had been lecturing a Navy SEAL about military training and discipline. The embarrassment was overwhelming, but it was quickly replaced by curiosity and professional respect. "How long?" Marcus asked. 8 years in special operations," Rivera replied. "Before that, I went through the same kind of basic training you're conducting here. I understand the value of traditional military discipline and structure." Marcus felt his worldview shifting as he processed this information. "Then why are your methods so different?" "SEALs are known for having some of the toughest training in the military." "They are tough," Rivera agreed. "But the toughness comes from the challenges themselves, not from breaking down the individuals who face those challenges. SEAL training is designed to identify people who can think clearly under extreme stress and work effectively with their teammates when everything goes wrong. But don't you need discipline and the ability to follow orders?" Marcus asked. "Absolutely," Rivera said. "But you also need the ability to make good decisions when there are no orders to follow. In special operations, you often find yourself in situations where the original plan doesn't work, and you have to adapt quickly to survive." Marcus thought about the exercises he had observed that day. Rivera's training methods were actually developing both skills simultaneously. The recruits were learning to work within structure while also developing independent thinking and problem-solving abilities. "The recruits who worked with you today," Marcus said slowly, "they performed better than I've seen in months. But I don't understand how you achieve that without using traditional disciplinary methods." Rivera leaned forward slightly. "Can I ask you a question? When you were learning to be an instructor, what motivated you to perform at your best?" Marcus considered the question. "I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to show that I could meet the standards and earn the respect of my superiors." "And how did you feel when instructors yelled at you or used intimidation?" The memory was still vivid. "Angry, mostly. Sometimes humiliated. It made me want to prove them wrong." "So the motivation came from within you," Rivera observed. "The external pressure just gave you something to push against. What if we could generate that same internal motivation without creating the anger and humiliation?" The concept was beginning to make sense to Marcus. "You're saying that people will push themselves just as hard if they believe in what they're doing and want to succeed for positive reasons." "I'm saying that in my experience, people perform at their highest level when they understand the purpose of what they're doing and feel like they're part of something important," Rivera replied. "Fear and intimidation can motivate people short-term, but they don't create the kind of thinking and adaptability we need in modern warfare. Marcus stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the darkened training fields. "I've been doing this for 3 years," he said quietly. "I thought I was preparing these recruits for the realities of military service. But maybe I was just preparing them to be afraid of making mistakes." "You were doing what you thought was best with the knowledge and experience you had," Rivera said. "That's all any of us can do. The question now is whether you want to explore different approaches." Marcus turned back to face Rivera. "Those classified assignments you mentioned, were you training other people?" "Among other things, yes," Rivera replied. "I worked with foreign military units, training them to operate independently in hostile environments. The techniques that worked best were the ones that built confidence and competence simultaneously." "And you think those techniques will work with basic recruits?" "I think the fundamental principles are the same," Rivera said. "People need to feel challenged, supported, and valued. They need to understand why they're doing something, not just how to do it. And they need to develop the confidence to make good decisions under pressure." Marcus sat back down, his mind racing with new possibilities. "What would you suggest for tomorrow's training?" Rivera smiled for the first time since Marcus had met him. "How about we design some exercises that combine traditional discipline with problem-solving challenges? We can maintain high standards while giving the recruits opportunities to develop leadership skills." "You mean like what you did today, but more structured?" "Exactly. We can create scenarios that require them to follow orders precisely while also requiring them to think creatively and work together effectively." Marcus felt a surge of excitement that he hadn't experienced in months. The prospect of learning new training methods from someone with Rivera's background was both intimidating and energizing. "There's something else I need to ask," Marcus said. "Why didn't you tell me about your background from the beginning? Why let me lecture you about training methods when you have more experience than I do?" Rivera's expression became serious. "Because I needed to understand your perspective first. Good training isn't about imposing one person's methods on everyone else. It's about combining the best elements from different approaches to create something that works for specific people in specific situations." "And what's your assessment of our specific situation?" "I think you have excellent instincts about military bearing and standards," Rivera said. "Your recruits clearly respect you, and they've learned discipline and attention to detail. What we can add is more emphasis on critical thinking and teamwork without sacrificing any of the structure they've already learned." Marcus nodded slowly, beginning to see how the two approaches could complement each other. "So tomorrow we experiment with combining methods." The following morning, Marcus woke before his alarm with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness he hadn't felt since his own training days. He and Rivera had spent 2 additional hours the previous evening planning a completely new approach to the day's exercises. They would combine Marcus's emphasis on precision and military bearing with Rivera's focus on adaptive thinking and teamwork. As the recruits assembled for morning formation, Marcus noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere. Word had spread about Rivera's background, though the details remained vague. The recruits seemed more alert and focused, sensing that something different was about to happen. "Today we're going to conduct a comprehensive training exercise that will test everything you've learned so far," Marcus announced to the assembled group. "You'll be divided into teams and given a series of challenges that require both individual excellence and group coordination." Rivera stepped forward to address the recruits. "The scenario is this. Your ship has suffered damage during a storm, and you need to work together to address multiple emergencies simultaneously. Each team will face different problems, but your success depends on how well you communicate and support each other across all teams." Marcus watched as the recruits absorbed this information. Instead of the usual nervous shuffling and whispered questions, they stood at attention with focused concentration. The change in their demeanor was immediately apparent. The exercise began with each team receiving sealed orders that described their specific emergency scenario. Team Alpha had to address flooding in the lower compartments. Team Bravo needed to restore power to critical systems. Team Charlie was responsible for treating injured personnel and establishing communications with other ships. What the recruits didn't know was that each team's success depended on receiving assistance or information from the other teams. Marcus and Rivera had designed the exercise to require cooperation and information sharing while maintaining the pressure of individual performance standards. Marcus positioned himself to observe Team Alpha, led by recruit Martinez, who had shown strong leadership potential in previous exercises. The team's first challenge was to move heavy equipment to seal off the flooding compartment, but they quickly discovered that their tools were inadequate for the job. In the past, Marcus would have expected the team to struggle with the impossible task until he intervened to provide guidance. Instead, Martinez immediately sent 2 team members to locate Team Bravo and ask about alternative solutions. The collaboration was seamless and natural. Meanwhile, Rivera was observing Team Charlie's efforts to establish communications. The team had correctly identified that they needed higher ground for their radio equipment, but they were struggling with the physical demands of moving the heavy communication gear up a steep hill rather than lowering the standards or providing easier equipment. Rivera simply asked, "What resources are available that you haven't considered yet?" Within minutes, the team had contacted Team Alpha to borrow some of their mechanical lifting equipment in exchange for medical supplies that Alpha needed for their injured team member simulation. Marcus felt a surge of pride and amazement as he watched the exercise unfold. The recruits were performing at a level he had never seen before. They were following orders precisely, maintaining military bearing, and demonstrating individual competence. But they were also thinking creatively, communicating effectively, and supporting each other in ways that went far beyond basic teamwork. The most impressive moment came when Team Bravo encountered a problem that seemed to have no solution. Their electrical repair equipment had failed, and they couldn't restore power to the critical systems. In previous exercises, this kind of setback typically led to frustration and finger-pointing. Instead, the team leader, Recruit Johnson, called for a timeout and gathered representatives from all 3 teams. They analyzed the overall situation and realized they could redistribute responsibilities to work around the equipment failure. Team Charlie could use backup communication systems. Team Alpha could implement manual procedures for their pumping operations. And Team Bravo could focus on restoring power to only the most essential systems. The solution required all 3 teams to modify their original plans and work together in a completely different way. It was exactly the kind of adaptive thinking that Rivera had talked about, but it was happening spontaneously among basic recruits who just weeks earlier had needed constant supervision for simple tasks. As the exercise concluded, Marcus and Rivera gathered the recruits for a debriefing session. Instead of the usual format where instructors provided feedback and criticism, they asked the recruits to analyze their own performance and identify lessons learned. What worked well during this exercise? Marcus asked the group. Hands shot up immediately. Recruit Martinez spoke first. Communication between teams was key. When we stopped trying to solve everything independently and started sharing information, the problems became much more manageable. Recruit Johnson added, "Having clear individual responsibilities within the team structure helped us stay organized even when we had to change plans." What was most challenging? Rivera asked. "Learning to trust other teams to do their part," replied Recruit Anderson, who was participating with limited duty due to his ankle injury. "At first, we wanted to control everything ourselves, but we had to learn that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness." Marcus found himself taking notes as the recruits continued their self-assessment. Their insights were sophisticated and thoughtful, demonstrating a level of understanding that went far beyond simple task completion. What would you do differently next time? Marcus asked. The responses revealed that the recruits had not only learned from the exercise, but had already begun thinking about how to apply those lessons to future challenges. They discussed better planning processes, more efficient communication protocols, and ways to prepare for unexpected setbacks. As the debriefing session concluded, Marcus realized that something fundamental had changed in his understanding of military training. The recruits had demonstrated all the discipline, competence, and military bearing he had always demanded. But they had also shown initiative, creativity, and leadership skills that his traditional methods had never developed. After dismissing the recruits for lunch, Marcus and Rivera walked back toward the administrative building in contemplative silence. Marcus was processing everything he had observed, trying to reconcile his new understanding with 3 years of previous experience. "That was extraordinary," Marcus said finally. "I've never seen basic recruits perform at that level. They were following orders and thinking independently at the same time." "They were ready for it," Rivera replied. "You had already established the foundation of discipline and attention to detail. We just gave them opportunities to build on that foundation." "But it's more than that," Marcus continued. "They seemed genuinely excited about the challenges. Usually difficult exercises create stress and anxiety. Today, the recruits looked like they were enjoying themselves." Rivera nodded. "When people understand the purpose of what they're doing and feel confident in their abilities, challenging situations become opportunities for growth rather than threats to survival." Marcus stopped walking as a realization hit him. "This is what you meant about building people up versus breaking them down. We gave them challenging problems to solve rather than impossible tasks to fail at." "Exactly," Rivera said. "The standards were just as high, maybe higher. But instead of using failure as a teaching tool, we used success as a motivating force." As they approached the building, Marcus saw Commander Richards waiting for them with an expression of curiosity and approval. "Lieutenant Thompson, Chief Rivera," the commander said as they approached. "I've been getting some interesting reports about this morning's exercise. Mind filling me in on what you two have been up to?" Commander Richards led Marcus and Rivera into his office, where several other senior officers were waiting. Marcus recognized Captain Walsh, the base training director, and Lieutenant Commander Peterson, who supervised instructor development programs. The presence of so much brass made Marcus nervous, but Rivera appeared as calm as ever. "Gentlemen, please sit down," Commander Richards said, gesturing to chairs arranged around a small conference table. "We've been observing your training innovations with great interest. Captain Walsh, would you like to explain what we've been discussing?" Captain Walsh leaned forward with an expression of intense focus. "Lieutenant Thompson, in 3 years of instruction, your recruits have consistently met all performance standards. Your methods have been effective, if somewhat traditional. But this morning's exercise results were remarkable." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He wasn't sure if he was about to be commended or reprimanded for deviating from established protocols. "The performance metrics we recorded today exceed anything we've seen in basic training," Captain Walsh continued. "Problem-solving speed, teamwork effectiveness, adaptability under pressure, individual initiative within group structures. Every measurable category showed significant improvement." Lieutenant Commander Peterson opened a folder and pulled out several charts and graphs. "The really interesting finding is that traditional military bearing and discipline scores actually increased rather than decreased. The recruits maintained higher standards of appearance, punctuality, and order while also demonstrating enhanced creative thinking." Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Rivera, who was listening attentively but showing no signs of surprise at these results. "Chief Rivera," Commander Richards said, "I think it's time we discussed your background more openly. These gentlemen have been cleared to hear about your previous assignments." Rivera straightened slightly in his chair. "Yes, sir. I spent 8 years with Naval Special Warfare Development Group. My last assignment was developing training protocols for international special operations units." The room fell silent as the implications of Rivera's background became clear. DevGru was among the most elite special operations units in the military. Marcus realized he had been working with someone whose experience far exceeded anything he had imagined. Captain Walsh was the first to speak. "Chief, your personnel file indicated previous special operations experience, but we didn't realize the extent of your background. What made you request a transfer to basic training instruction?" "Sir, I believe that the principles that make special operations teams effective can be adapted for all military training, Rivera replied. Special operations personnel aren't superhuman. They're regular people who have been trained to think clearly, under extreme pressure, and work effectively with their teammates. Those same capabilities would benefit every sailor in the Navy. Lieutenant Commander Peterson leaned forward with interest. Are you saying that basic recruits can be trained using special operations methods? Not exactly the same methods, Rivera clarified, but the same underlying principles. Emphasis on understanding mission objectives rather than just following procedures. Training that builds confidence and competence simultaneously. Problem-solving exercises that require both individual excellence and team coordination. Marcus found his voice. Sirs, I have to admit that I was initially resistant to Chief Rivera's approaches. They seemed to contradict everything I had learned about military training. But the results speak for themselves. What specific changes did you observe in the recruits? Commander Richards asked. Marcus organized his thoughts carefully. They maintained all the discipline and military bearing we've always required, but they also showed initiative and leadership that I've never seen in basic training. They solved problems creatively while still following orders precisely. More importantly, Marcus continued, surprising himself with his enthusiasm, they seemed to genuinely understand why they were doing things, not just how to do them. They connected individual tasks to larger mission objectives in ways that made their performance more effective. Captain Walsh made notes as Marcus spoke. These are exactly the qualities we've been trying to develop Navy-wide. The modern operating environment requires sailors who can adapt quickly to changing conditions while maintaining high standards of performance. Rivera spoke up. Sir, if I may suggest, the key is combining high expectations with strong support systems. We challenged the recruits with difficult problems, but we also gave them the tools and knowledge they needed to succeed, as opposed to setting them up to fail and then correcting their mistakes? Lieutenant Commander Peterson asked. Exactly, Rivera replied. Both approaches can teach lessons, but one builds confidence while the other can create fear of taking initiative. Commander Richards leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. Gentlemen, I'm going to be direct with you. The Navy has been looking for ways to improve training effectiveness without lowering standards. What you've accomplished in one day suggests that we may have found an approach worth exploring further. Marcus felt a surge of excitement mixed with apprehension. Sir, are you suggesting that these methods be implemented more broadly? I'm suggesting that we conduct a more comprehensive evaluation, Captain Walsh replied. We'd like you two to continue developing these integrated training approaches and document your methods and results carefully. If the outcomes remain consistently positive, we may recommend these techniques for adoption at other training facilities. The implications of this possibility were overwhelming to Marcus. His entire understanding of military instruction had been transformed in just 2 days, and now he was being asked to help develop new Navy-wide training standards. Chief Rivera, Commander Richards said, would you be willing to extend your assignment here to work on this project? Absolutely, sir, Rivera replied without hesitation. Lieutenant Thompson, how do you feel about partnering with Chief Rivera to develop and test these new approaches? Marcus looked at Rivera, remembering his initial resistance and embarrassment at discovering the man's true background. Now he saw an opportunity to learn from one of the most experienced instructors he was ever likely to encounter. Sir, I'd be honored to work with Chief Rivera, Marcus said. I have a lot to learn about these methods, but I believe they represent the future of military training. After the meeting concluded and the senior officers had departed, Marcus and Rivera walked back toward the training fields where the afternoon session was about to begin. The recruits were already assembled, and Marcus could see a new energy and confidence in their bearing. I owe you an apology, Marcus said as they approached the formation. I spent our first 2 days together thinking I needed to teach you about military training. I was too arrogant to realize that you were the one with lessons to offer. Rivera shook his head. You don't owe me any apology. You were doing your job, protecting your recruits, and maintaining standards. What happened over the past few days was collaboration, not one person teaching another. But I lost my cool, Marcus said. I let my ego get in the way of listening to what you were trying to show me. And I learned valuable things from watching your methods, Rivera replied. You have excellent instincts about military bearing and attention to detail. The recruits respect you because you set clear expectations and hold them accountable. Those qualities are essential for any training program. Marcus smiled as he realized that Rivera was right. The new training approach they had developed wasn't just Rivera's methods replacing Marcus's methods. It was a genuine combination that used the best elements of both approaches. As they took their positions in front of the assembled recruits, Marcus felt a sense of excitement about the future that he hadn't experienced since his own early days in the Navy. He was still the tough, demanding instructor his recruits expected him to be. But now he was also something more, a mentor who could help develop the kind of thinking, adaptable leaders the modern Navy needed. "Good afternoon, people," Marcus called out to the formation. "This afternoon we're going to build on this morning's exercise with some advanced leadership challenges. You've proven that you can work together effectively under pressure. Now we're going to see how well you can lead others through the same kind of situations." As the recruits responded with enthusiasm and focus, Marcus realized that losing his cool had actually led him to find something much more valuable, a better understanding of what true military leadership could accomplish.